Hey everyone. So in this lesson, what we're going to do is how to divide algebraic fractions using factorizations. Okay, so to do that, we have to go through these steps, and I've written them up on here. The first one is, first off, whenever we are doing dividing fractions, we use this acronym called KFC, right? Really easy to remember. It's a fast food chain. So K means keep the first fraction the same. F means the second fraction is flipped. So it's flipped where the denominator now becomes the numerator becomes the denominator. Okay. And then C means change the operation to multiplication. Okay, that's the first step. So I need to use KFC first. Then what I need to do is I need to use my methods of factorization. Okay, so the methods of factorizations are basically, I'll just write it down here. First up is HCF, highest common factor. PSF, which is product sum factors, which we kind of looked into last lesson. And then there's grouping in pairs. Now, grouping in pairs is used when I see a non-monic. Okay. And then the last one is difference between two squares. Okay. Between two squares. There we go. So it's this formula. Okay, so that's difference between two squares. Those are my methods for factorization. Okay, grouping in pairs is only for non-monic. Okay, that basically uses HCF and PSF in one. Okay, all right, those two steps, that's all you need. Okay, let's go through our example here. We need to, I guess, solve and factorize x squared plus 8x plus 15 over x squared minus 25 divided by 4x plus 12 over x squared minus 5x. Now, looking at that question, that's really, really hard, okay? But I don't want you to give up or be really overwhelmed. What I want you to do is, this is the bigger question. What I want you to do is, I want you to look at the little parts, okay? So first up, from our steps, I am first going to use KFC, okay? K means keep the first fraction. So this fraction right here, I need to keep. So basically I'm rewriting it, okay? So this is what I'm going to do. X squared plus 8x plus 15 is all over x squared minus 25. I've kept the first fraction the same. Once I finish putting the first fraction the same, I'm going to go to F. F means flip the second fraction. Second fraction is this one right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it so that x squared minus 5x is at the top and 4x plus 12 is at the bottom. So like the following. I'm flipping it just like this. Okay. So K, F, and last but not least is C, which is change the division sign into a multiplication. Easy. Step number one, to change it to KFC, done. Or to use KFC, done. Step number two, okay, it still looks a little bit hard, but now it's just a tad bit easier. Step number two is basically using the methods of factorization. Okay, let's use our little microscope to now just look at one part of this big question. What I'm going to do now is I am going to actually look at this part here, just the top numerator on the first fraction. I've got x squared plus 8x plus 15. Well, what methods of factorization should I use? Well, if I look up here, I can use HCF, PSF, grouping in pairs, which is non-monics, and difference between two squares. Okay. If I look at it here, I can't use HCF because there's nothing in common. I can't use grouping in pairs because in the front of x squared here, there's no number greater than 1. So I can't use grouping in pairs, I can't use HCF. Now looking at our formula for difference between two squares, right here. A squared minus B squared. So it needs to look something like that. Okay, so basically x squared minus a perfect square. So like 25, 16, 9, 64. Okay, those are perfect squares. Perfect squares are just basically 8 times 8, 4 times 4, 3 times 3. Okay. If I look at it here, no, it doesn't look like that format. So what I'm going to use now, I'm left with P, S, F. Okay, remember, I'm only focusing on this, nothing else. So the product, P means product. The product will be plus 15. Okay, so I'm going to write plus 15. My sum is going to be plus 8. Don't take the x there, okay? It's just 8, plus 8. You have to take it with the sign here, but not with the x. That's the most important part. Now, I've got my product and I got my sum. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the factors or two numbers multiplied together to get me 15. Okay, so if I had to brainstorm, I can go 1 and 15. Okay, and then I could go 3 and 5. And that's all at the moment, right? Now, looking at our pairs, 1 and 15, 3 and 5, if I were to add them together to get me 8, which one should I use? Well, it's obvious. I need to use 3 and 5. So my factors are going to be 3 and 5. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If not, just push back and then you can watch it again. All right, next part here. What we're going to do, I use PSF. So I'm going to factorize the top part. So that means when I factorize, I have brackets. It's x squared, so that means I need x on one or x on each of the brackets. Okay, now I've got my factors 3 and 5. They're both positive, so I'm just going to add them in as plus 3, plus 5. That's all. Okay, the numerator is done. Now let's do the hard ones, or the next few ones. Okay, so let's now look into this bottom one here. This denominator in the first fraction, x squared minus 25. What method of factorization do I use? Well, it kind of looks like difference between two squares. I've got an x squared minus a perfect square, 25. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make two brackets, one x's, each x on both the brackets. All I'm going to do whenever I notice that it's a difference between two squares, I'm just going to square root the numbers. Square root of x squared is basically x. That's why I've got an x in each bracket. Okay, and then the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, now difference between two squares. What do I put in the middle, right? Between the x and the 5. Well, let's look at our formula. Looking here, if I have a squared minus b squared, I have to write it in this format. One bracket with a minus, one bracket with a plus. Okay, so one bracket with a minus, one bracket with a plus. I'm going to now, the first fraction is all factorized. Let's do the second fraction. I'm going to focus on this top one right here. X squared minus 5x. Okay, I can't use PSF, okay, because there's no term like this plus 15 or anything like that. I can't use difference between two squares because this negative 5x is not a perfect square. I can't use non-monics or grouping in pairs because first off, the number at the front of x squared is not greater than 1. So all that's left is HCF, highest common factor. Looking at x squared minus 5x, what's the highest common factor? I can see it. They both share the letter x. Okay, they've got an x on each. I'm going to take it out, put a bracket. X times what gives me x squared? X. X times what gives me negative 5x? Negative 5. And that's it. That's probably the most easiest one. Okay. All right, let's do the bottom one. 4x plus 12. Okay, can't use PSF. Can't use difference between two squares because there's no x squared or anything like that, nor 12 is a perfect square. Grouping in pairs, I can't. Again, no x squared. So all I have left is HCF. Okay, what is the highest common factor between 4x plus 12? Well, the number 4 is the common factor. Okay, 4 times what gives me 4x? X. 4 times what gives me 12? A positive 3. So far, okay? Once we finish factorizing this, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cancel out anything that are in pairs. So for example, this x plus 5 and this x plus 5, that's one pair of exactly the same thing. X plus 3 and x plus 3. And last but not least, x minus 5 and x minus 5. Okay, all I'm left with now is here turns into 1 because there's nothing left. I'm left with x over 4. So now my answer is going to be, of course, x over 4. Okay, it's a long process, but once you've broken it down, it turns into something a little bit easier for you to do. Okay. Hope that makes sense, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!